And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today's October the 6th, 279th day of the year. Just 86 days remain to the year's over with, and we get to start a new year. Holidays, observances. We're in Architecture Day. National Mad Hatter Day. Celebrate the silliness on this day devoted to John Tyndall's Mad Hatter from Alice in Wonderland by getting weird, hosting an afternoon tea, or just really enjoy life. National Noodle Day. World Cerebral Palsy Day. National Coaches Day. National Transfer Money to Your Daughter Day. Nothing like the feeling of emptying your pockets and giving it all to your daughter. National Physician Assistant Day. National German American Day. Blends old world traditions with new world spirit. Weaves a tapestry of culture. National Child Health Day. National Badger Day. National Consignment Day. National Orange Wine Day. National Plus Size Appreciation Day. Inbox Zero Day. National Depression Screening Day. And a National Dysgraphia Awareness Day. For those who are not aware what that is, and I wasn't originally, it's a celebration of different writing minds. Explains dysgraphia as a condition that affects letter formation, spelling, spacing, written flow. Community members gather to share tools that build writing confidence. For me, I use a computer. National Energy Geek Day. World Habitat Day. World Day of Bullying Prevention. Mid-Autumn Festival. It's an enchanting celebration. Families gather under the moonlit sky to relish delightful treats and share laughter and celebrate unity and abundance. National Manufacturing Week. World Animal Week. BPD Awareness Week. It's a mental health condition. And when you understand it, it fosters empathy with those navigating the complexities of BPD. And a National Plasma Awareness Week. Seed gathering season. Samhain. Red Valley. Back Care Awareness Week. National Curry Week. Truffle Days in Croatia. World Space Week. Celebrate Community Week. National Midwifery Week. National Spinning and Weaving Week. Famous people born on this date. Elizabeth Shue. She was, at one point, quite the actress. On that point, let's turn to the stories in the news because there's always something going on. Another one of God's anointed has interfered with President Trump's Portland security plan. Gavin Newsom is celebrating what he calls a victory. Got to take care of the poor criminals. President Trump was going to send National Guard to Portland, and the federal judge has stopped it amid a constitutional challenge. The U.S. District Judge Karen Immergut ruled the action was unlawful and unconstitutional, issued an emergency temporary restraining order to halt the deployment of California's National Guard. The order also bars the use of troops from any other state or Washington, D.C. and Oregon. What we ought to do is take this member of God's anointed, put her on a bus with a whole bunch of other undocumented immigrants, and send her back to Mexico. Well, the police union calls Chicago's refusal to help ICE agents shocking. It's also being called a violation of duty. The nation's largest police union condemned the report Chicago officers were told not to help ICE agents surrounded by protesters called it a shocking and violent violation of law enforcement's duty to protect fellow officers in danger. Presidents of the National Fraternal Order of Police and Illinois State Fraternal Order of Police expressed shock at reports that Chicago's Chief of Patrol directed officers not to assist U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agencies that were surrounded by protesters on Saturday. The part of the problem is they seem to believe that everybody in the world has a right to come here, and we don't have a right to protect ourselves. Well, Greta Thunberg is back in the news. She has made a bunch of alleged jail complaints. The Israeli government's calling them brazen lies. She claims she sat for hours on hard surfaces in a bedbug-infested Israeli jail. She was denied adequate food and water. Israel's foreign ministry says they're all brazen lies. According to correspondence from the Swedish Foreign Ministry, seen by The Guardian, Thunberg told officials she developed rashes caused by bedbugs. She was also said to have complained of dehydration. Letter shared with Thunberg's parents also said she described harsh and exhausting treatment after she was detained by Israeli forces during her Gaza-bound global Sumud flotilla aid expedition. The only aid she was trying to give, as far as I can see from looking at all the reports, was to expand her reputation of being an activist. Well, more lawmakers say they're rejecting their paychecks as the government shutdown drags on. A growing number of lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have declared they're not going to accept their paychecks. The federal government's been shut down for nearly a week after Senate Democrats rejected Republicans' plan to fund agencies through November 21st. And this has been proposed multiple times and been rejected by the Democrats. Representative Chip Roy, a Republican of Texas, Ashley Hinson, Republican of Iowa, Tom Barrett, Republican of Michigan, Mariannette Miller-Meeks, Republican of Iowa, and Rob Bresnahan, Republican of Pennsylvania, among the Republicans who wrote to the Chief Administrative Officer of the U.S. House of Representatives, asking her to pay to be withheld during a shutdown. And when you become a millionaire by serving in Congress, you can do that. Well, President Trump has warned of massive bloodshed if Hamas fails to agree to a peace deal. He made a social media post about Hamas Sunday evening, minutes before the deadline of a peace proposal passed. Deadline was 6 p.m. Eastern Time Sunday. In a message on Truth Social, Trump wrote that there had been very positive discussions with Hamas and countries from all over the world, Arab, Muslim, and everybody else this weekend, to release the hostages and end the war in Gaza. But most importantly, finally, there have been long-sought peace in the Middle East. And the talks have been very successful and we're proceeding rapidly. Technical teams will meet again on Monday in Egypt to work through and clarify the final deals. Hamas, though, is getting support from a lot of people in the world, a lot of people in this country. Well, CBS staffers are abuzz as Barry Weiss reportedly set to join the network's top brass. Nobody really knows what to expect. Everybody's sending the articles around, waiting to see how it's going to change, or if it does, according to one CBS staffer. Outlets like Puck News and the New York Post reported last Thursday Paramount said to announce it's acquired Weiss's publication, The Free Press, for $150 million, and Paramount's new owner, Dave Ellison, will appoint Weiss to become the editor-in-chief of CBS News, where she'll report directly to him. Going to bypass CBS News president Tom Sabrowski, currently reports to Paramount TV media chair George Cheeks. Nobody really knows what's going on at the moment, which is kind of typical for CBS. Well, Amy Schumer's continuing her weight loss journey. And she is displaying legs for days, wearing short skirts to show off what she thinks she has. She's wearing a tiny black dress and heels in the photos that she shared, accompanied by two friends as the threesome enjoyed the Paul McCartney concert in Las Vegas. Well, my screen just went dark. I'm not sure what happened, but it seems to have come back. I was talking about Amy Schumer. She's a 44-year-old comedian, and she's trying to show she's relevant. Okay, Nicole Kidman makes her first appearance as Urban's female tour mate, raises eyebrows. The rumor is he's got the hots for his female guitar player. Well, Buffalo Bills fans snagged Josh Allen's errant pass and ran out of the stadium with the football. A once-in-a-lifetime souvenir. Josh Allen was leading the Bills down the field on the opening drive of the second half against New England Patriots on Sunday. On the Patriots' 6-yard line, he rolled to his right looking for an open receiver. Instead, he threw the ball into the back of the end zone. A Bills fan in a Matt Milano jersey caught the ball and ran from his seat at Highmark Stadium up the stairs, looking for the exit. The moment stunned NBC broadcaster Mike Tirico, who wondered where the man was going with the football. Stadium ushers around the fan didn't attempt to stop him from leaving. And it is certainly a once-in-a-lifetime souvenir. Buffalo lost the game 23-20. Like Tirico said, the fan missed the touchdown pass from Allen to Curtis Samuel on the next play. The score gave Buffalo a 10-6 lead at the time. Well, it's the second odd moment involving Bills fans at Highmark Stadium during the season so far. And he'll be bragging about it at work today. Well, a slain student's grieving father is vowing action after repeat offender allegedly murdered his daughter. Stephen Frederico's daughter, Logan, 22, was murdered in her sleep in May while staying overnight at a friend's house in Columbia, South Carolina. The suspect, Alexander Devontae Dickey, 30 years old, broke into the house, shot Logan, and went on a shopping spree with her stolen credit and debit cards. And that's bad enough, but what shocked and outraged many folks is not only the brutality of the crime, but the fact that court documents reveal Dickey had 39 arrests and 25 felony charges brought against him before Logan's murder. But he spent barely 600 days in jail over the past 10 years. People are getting upset with the lenient legal system. Now here we had somebody vandalize my wife's car, flattened a tire, and I had 5 police officers in the front yard wanting to arrest me for having a derelict car. They didn't care about the fact that somebody else had done it, because that would have meant work. They'd have to sweat to find who did it. Just easier to arrest the homeowner. Well, President Trump has told troops they're going to get every last penny of their pay, despite the ongoing government shutdown. That definitely affects military pay. At a ceremony marking the Navy's 250th anniversary, President Trump sought to reassure service members affected by the shutdown that they're going to receive every last penny of their pay and promised an across-the-board raise once the impasse ends. Jelly Roll's wife has blasted trolls who questioned her faith after getting backlash for wearing a skimpy Halloween costume. Buddy Code tossed Scooby snacks to social media followers with a peek at her Halloween plans, only for the trolls to turn out in droves. She went rogue in a sexy Velma costume shared with her millions of followers. She slammed critics attempting to ruin the fun. Well, President Trump's, according to Life, Liberty, and Levine, is protecting the American people from terrorist states in our own hemisphere. And there is certainly a number of them. Well, Keith Urban's guitarist, Maggie Ball, ignites romance buzz as fresh details are coming to light. While rumors of Keith Urban's troubled marriage to Nicole Kidman continue to swirl, his guitarist, Maggie Ball, is finding herself center stage. Days before Kidman filed for divorce from Urban, Ball, a 25-year-old country star, is currently on tour with Urban and his band, posted an eyebrow-raising video from a recent show that left fans questioning the nature of her relationship with the country star. When they're trying to get to you, Maggie, I'll be your guitar player, Urban 57 sang on stage, replacing the original line, when they're trying to get to you, baby, I'll be the fighter. Insider confirmed to Fox News that there had been whispers of another woman. TMZ was first to report the country star may already be involved with somebody else. All the signs point to the fact that Keith's with another woman. Let's just say Nicole doesn't dispute it, but she's still shocked over it, according to a source close to Kidman. According to various social media posts, Florida native may be romantically linked to Cameron Coley, a 25-year-old lighting designer from California. According to the outlet, Coley shared a post earlier this year celebrating his one-year anniversary with Ball. Like many of the so-called stars, they're playing musical beds. Miami's next legacy moment's coming up. City leaders say they're ready. Miami-Dade County expects up to 1 million visitors and a $1.5 billion economic impact from 2026 FIFA World Cup matches. Miami's never shied away from the spotlight, from hosting more Super Bowls than any other city to transforming Art Basel and Formula One into global spectacles. But as Mayor Francis Suarez puts it, next summer will be 7 Super Bowls crammed into a single month. With as many as 1 million visitors expected for the 2026 FIFA World Cup, the Magic City is bracing for its next legacy moment. The question is whether it can keep pace with all the hype. Former Biden officials call Virginia AG candidate Jay Jones' violent text part of a private conversation. The voters shouldn't pay attention to the fact that threats were made. That was discussed during Sunday's Meet the Press. The former Biden aide was Neera Tanden, condemned the Virginia State Attorney General candidate Jay Jones' violent text, but said they were in fact part of a private conversation. Tanden was part of a panel to discuss the ongoing federal government shutdown when one panelist, former Trump political advisor Mark Short, shifted the topic to Jones' text messages attacking a political opponent. He said, "Can we stop with the pearl clutching about the mean tweets and the sombrero tweets? This week it came to light that a Democratic candidate for Attorney General in the state of Virginia called for the assassination of a political opponent. Called for the assassination of a political opponent's family, and there's not one national Democrat calling for him to step aside. Not one." He said it was disgraceful. As long as the Democrats do it, it's okay. If a Republican does it, I'll get out the rope and the torches and the picket signs. Well, President Trump has stopped Biden's Euro-style solution to flight delays and has paved the ways for lower fares. Biden administration spent 4 years putting a record level of new regulatory impediments on the nation's airlines. And an analysis by the Office of Management and Budget estimates that Biden's Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg nearly tripled the number of transportation-related rules and regulations. And at the end of the day, there's no evidence all this added red tape made airline travel any safer or reduced flight delays. According to the talking heads, Biden should have learned from the airline deregulation in the late 70s, which liberated airlines from government controls on pricing and flight routes. A famous study by Robert Crandall of the Brookings Institute found those reforms ushered in the modern era of air travel with much lower prices and hundreds of billions of dollars of savings for consumers over the past 4 decades. Well, self-described unapologetic supporter of Israel, John Fetterman weighs in as Trump seeks to broker a peace deal. There's also, he's a Democratic senator from Pennsylvania. He's a staunch and unflinching supporter of Israel, wants Hamas to accept the peace deal President Trump's aiming to help broker, calling out the pro-Palestinian protesters for not demanding that Hamas agree to the peace deal. I also have heard rumors he's leaving the Democratic Party because of their silliness. Well, tourism safety fears rise after a museum thief stole a pharaoh's priceless bracelet. International spotlight recently turned to crime in Egypt. This bracelet was stolen from a Cairo museum and melted down, forever lost to history. Artifact once belonged to Pharaoh Amenemope, a ruler from the Third Intermediate Period. It's 3,000 years old, stolen by specialists at the Egyptian Museum's Restoration Laboratory and sold for about $4,000 this month. Authorities tracked down all the parties involved, including the jewelers and the foundry workers who touched the bracelet, arrested them all, but not in time to save the object. And though this wasn't directly a tourist-targeted incident, the incidents raised concerns about crime in Egypt and might make some rethink upcoming trips to the Gift of the Nile. Well, Denise Richards' ex is calling Charlie Sheen, Brandy Glanville to testify in a divorce drama. Question is, what could they know? Denise Richards' estranged husband, Aaron Pfeifers, attempted to drag Charlie Sheen and Brandy Glanville into his acrimonious divorce battle with the Wild Things star. His lawyers named Sheen and Glanville as witnesses in court documents obtained by Fox News. In the filing, the attorney said that Sheen is previously married to Richards, and Glanville, who co-starred with her on Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, could testify regarding Denise's history of not being truthful and of drug and alcohol abuse. Well, we'll see how all that plays out. Blizzard has trapped hundreds of people on Mount Everest as rescue teams are trying to save lives. A massive and sudden blizzard on Mount Everest Tibetan slopes trapped nearly 1,000 hikers in remote camps during China's National Day holiday weekend. That's according to state media reports. Reuters and Jimu News reported Sunday that at least 350 people have so far reached safety. Contact's been made with several hundred others still stranded on the snowbound slopes. Storm hit Friday, dumping heavy snow and rain across the Himalayas. Worst conditions came near the eastern Kangshung face of Everest and Tibet's Kama Valley, where elevations averaged 13,779 feet. Well, let's see. Virginia's gubernatorial race is heating up. Winston's Earl Sears releases an ad linking Abigail Spanberger to Jay Jones after violent texts have resurfaced. The Virginia GOP gubernatorial candidate Winston Earl Sears unveiled a new campaign ad Sunday, linking her Democratic opponent Abigail Spanberger to Attorney General hopeful Jay Jones, whose recently resurfaced text messages have drawn widespread backlash. I mean, let's face it, when you are urging assassinating your rival, that does tend to raise questions. Well, Kash Patel has vowed justice after DHS agents' vehicles are rammed in Chicago by protesters. 2 suspects allegedly rammed a Department of Homeland Security agent's vehicle amid growing unrest across the country. The suspects, Marimar Martinez and Anthony Ian Santos Ruiz, were described by DHS as being domestic terrorists who ambushed the agents in Chicago on Saturday. And finally, Bill Maher TV host has ripped Kamala Harris's book. He says the title should have been called Everybody Sucks But Me. And pretty much that's the tone of the book. And rank and file D.C. officers accuse their superiors of downgrading crimes to mask the real level of crime in the city. Roughly 3 dozen rank and file officers and detectives have lodged complaints with the DOJ as the city faces an investigation into whether crime statistics were intentionally misreported under the Trump administration. If you remember, in August, President Trump deployed the National Guard to D.C., citing a need to combat crime, bloodshed, bedlam, and squalor. Well, that ends our news segment. We've been talking about a lot of strange and unusual topics. We're going to be talking about today paranormal UFO sightings. One of the best known alien abduction cases was the Betty Andreson affair. She's claimed to have experienced some pretty strange incidents with extraterrestrial entities. One of them was witnessed by her entire family. According to the story, when she and her children were staying with her parents while her husband was recovering from a bad car accident, this was January 25th, 1967. According to what she had to say, she was just killing time with her family, like she usually did. She was actually in the kitchen doing dishes after dinner when something suddenly went wrong with the electricity in the house. Light bulbs began to turn on and off by themselves, so they finally fizzled off completely. And after the power went out, a sinister pinkish red illumination from an unknown source began to shine through all the windows in the house. The lights themselves were somehow unsettling and anxiety-provoking, and her kids became scared and began to cry for their mother. And Betty Andreson, being the mother she was, immediately rushed over to give what comfort she could to her children. And as she was preoccupied dealing with her children, her father took a look outside in order to find the source of the red light that was filling the entire house. And according to reports, he got quite a shock. He says that when he looked out the window, he saw a group of goblin-like entities moving across the yard in an entirely alien fashion, with that odd jerking and jumping motion. They were advancing on the house quite rapidly. He turned and ran to tell the rest of his family what he'd seen, but by the time he got near to them, these same creatures you just seen outside are walking right through the front door. Well, what he witnessed back in the 1960s has been an often repeated feat in UFO lore. According to a number of accounts about alien abduction, the ETs seem to possess some sort of technology that's able to temporarily manipulate solid matter. It allows them to walk through doors and walls. Also, several accounts of ETs being able to levitate humans through solid walls and ceilings and transport them directly into the hovering spacecraft. These abilities, of course, appear like magic to us, but then again, if you were to give an ancient Greek a smartphone 3,000 years ago, he'd no doubt think that you just give him the magic wand. So a civilization thousands of years ahead of us may be advanced enough that their standard technological applications appear almost supernatural in nature, even if in reality they're quite grounded in science, although a much more advanced science than anything we've got. At any rate, these goblin-like aliens are easily able to walk right through the front door and take care of their business. After her father witnessed this feat of matter manipulation, looked over at his family and found they all appeared to be completely frozen in place, as if in suspended animation. The elder Andreson then took a horrified survey of the home invaders. There were 5 of them. One was taller than the rest at about 5 feet. The rest were not much bigger than Mr. Andreson's grandkids. And all had the same facial features, the classic features of the so-called gray aliens. Big wide-set eyes, just a tiny bump of a nose, a slit for a mouth, and non-existent ears. Oversized craniums popped out of nearly identical uniforms as the creatures marched in military fashion. Group sped up. The 4 shorter creatures approached Mr. Andreessen's daughter Betty, and the taller entity approached the elder Andreessen. He said the creature confronted him, looked him right in the eye, and that's all Mr. Andreessen could remember. From that moment forward, his mind was shut down, and he wouldn't have any recollection of anything else that transpired. It was his daughter Betty that would piece together what happened next. According to her, after her father had been placed in suspended animation by the leading ET, the aliens led her outside and on board their UFO. And she was put through the standard battery of tests and diagnostic evaluations by the observing entities before she was finally returned to her home. After she was floated through the door by the creature, she observed her family still in the same exact state of suspended animation as when she left the house. Creatures then made their exit, and her families were released from their paralysis. Once everything was back to normal, all Betty and her father could recall was the bizarre ordeal of strange things walking through the door. Beyond that, there was no recollection of what had happened to them. Betty, of course, being deeply religious, at first interpreted the event as being a spiritual or supernatural experience. And rather than aliens using high-tech methods to invade her home, she initially thought she had been visited by angels or some other type of divine creatures. True nature of what happened to the Andreessen family came to light only after she sought the services of a hypnotherapist named Henry Edelson. He was able to use hypnosis to regress her back to the point at which she was first confronted by the alien entities. And under Edelson's scrutiny, it was revealed that the tall alien approached her, introduced himself as Quagga, and asked her to come with him to the craft. Of course, Betty agreed, not that she seemed to have much of a choice, but at any rate, after giving her consent, she was floated out the door with the creatures and taken aboard their craft. And she was given a standard abductee group of examinations and tests. After these tests, she was put in a chair, and as soon as she was in the chair, tubes came down from the ceiling like tentacles and inserted themselves into her mouth and nostrils and plugged them completely. And if this wasn't frightening enough, a glass covering came down from the ceiling, encapsulating her as if she was in a bug captured in a jar. Reasoning for the tubes in her mouth and nostrils became apparent in the next instant as the jar was filled with a viscous fluid, completely immersing her. Despite being completely immersed in this gelatinous liquid, she was still able to breathe comfortably due to the tubes in her nose and mouth. Now, the purpose of this procedure wasn't quite clear, but some have suggested it was a means of cushioning and protecting from the ET's form of space travel, because shortly after it was inserted, according to Betty, the craft shot off at a faster-than-light speed back to the alien homeworld, where the beings wanted to give Betty a grand tour. Her claims of encounters with divinity and quasi-religious symbolism would continue even on an apparently alien planet. At one point, she was taken to a room with a statue of a large bird that stood several feet high. And as she and her handler stood before this statue, it suddenly erupted into flames. Next thing she knew, the entire structure had been incinerated to ashes, and out of the ashes, an odd worm-like figure emerged and began to telepathically communicate with her. It said, "You've seen and you've heard. Do you understand?" But like most everyone else confronted with such a bizarre spectacle, she informed the worm she had no idea what they were trying to communicate. The entity then said, I've chosen you to show the world." As in that Betty somehow decided this worm-like being was nothing short of the creator of the universe itself, who had chosen her for a divine mission. When her encounter first emerged, many UFO researchers were divided on the validity of her story. On the one hand, her case is about as solid as the UFO cases come, given the fact that she had external witnesses to the onset of the alien encounter. But on the other hand, much of the imagery she described, such as the encounter with the worm, just seemed a bit too fantastic to be taken seriously. Wouldn't be until about 20 years later when UFO researcher Bud Hopkins broached the topic of screen memories that a new explanation of what may have happened to Andreessen began to emerge. According to Hopkins, ET entities seem to have an ability to manipulate human memory. These entities can take one memory, such as that of a scary alien staring in the face, and insert a cover memory. One is a little bit more palatable, and deposit that memory in place with a more traumatic one. In his book, that I read and highly recommend called Missing Time, Hopkins writes about several victims of alien abduction who initially had a nagging memory of owls staring at them through their windows, only to find their hypnosis regression. This was just a smokescreen to cover an extra memory of aliens peering in at them. Taking this theory into consideration, some researchers believe that these ETs knew how religious Ms. Andreessen was and made an effort to purposely manipulate her memories and cloak her experience in religious ideology. That way they could seamlessly create screen memories that were tailor-made to suit her personal understanding and worldview. Whatever the case might be, subsequent psychological testing seemed to prove that Ms. Andreessen was neither mentally ill nor attempting to be deceptive. Whatever visions were presented to her during her strange journey, divine, alien, or otherwise, they happened, at least for Ms. Andreessen, just as she said they happened. Of course, when you're dealing with situations like this, with technology far beyond anything we've ever thought about doing, you really don't know what the truth is. Well, from Betty Andreessen, let's turn to Barbara Archer and her strange encounters. Alien abduction phenomena really seemed to heat up in the 1980s, and it was in that decade professional academics began to look more closely into things, especially strange phenomena. One of these academics who dared descend from the ivory tower in order to find out more was a tenured associate professor at Temple University named David Jacobs. He investigated unexplained encounters and the sightings of extraterrestrial experience by everyday people in his book, which was entitled Secret Life. The encounters he investigated ran through a giant swath of society with men and women of all kinds of backgrounds and social statuses. But one of the most intriguing out of all these abductees was a university student named Barbara Archer. Jacobs met Miss Archer in 1987 when she was 21 years old, in the process of finishing up her journalism degree. She'd begun to have seemingly random panic attacks and flashbacks of disturbing and disjointed memories she couldn't consciously account for. So she went to Dr. Jacobs for help in understanding where these flashes of strange memories are coming from, and what he uncovered was certainly shocking. Under his guidance, Barbara was able to recall something incredible that had happened to her when she was just 16 years old. She recalled a night on which she had just turned off all the lights and was ready for bed when some sort of intense illumination, shining like a spotlight, flooded into her room. She drew the curtains, but the ambient lighting continued unabated. She tried to look out between the blinds to find the source of the radiation, but failed to see where it was coming from. Well, the light then abruptly winked off, and she got an unmistakable feeling of a presence being in her room. She turned around just in time to see an alien entity of some sort standing in front of her closet. And this seemed to be quite common in UFO lore, and if the narrative is believed, these ETs seem to have the capacity for teleportation. There have been several incidents, such as Barbara's, in which a flash of lights witnessed immediately before an entity emerges out of the shadows of a darkened room. Strangely, the being often used the empty space of a closet as their favorite indoor destination, bringing a whole new meaning to the term monster in the closet. According to Barbara, this very real monster quickly grabbed her by the arm. Next thing she knew, she was in a rapid burst. It just took a split second to occur. Pulled right through the solid matter of the windows. She was composed of nothing more than air. Well, a lot of abductees claim to feel their entire body vibrating during the process of being pushed through solid matter. Some contend their very molecules are vibrated at such a frequency their bodies can pass through solid walls and windows and doors. It was only after this feat of alien engineering and matter manipulation she was sucked right up into a hovering UFO as if she was on an elevator. Well, she can recall looking down on her way up and seeing the roof of the houses below, the tops of the trees, before she looked up to see the dull gray bottom of the spaceship. She said it was parked in midair, waiting to whisk her away. When she was on board, the standard battery of tests, such as skin scrapings and blood samples, was conducted before she was returned to her house the same way she was picked up. While she was visiting Ireland in 1988, she had a particularly vivid encounter with the ETs in which she was brought into what can only be termed some sort of alien nursery. She recalls being led down a hallway of the craft and into a room with incubators housing strange little babies. Mere sight of them made her recoil in fear and revulsion, she said. The baby seemed to fit a classic motif in alien abduction, that of hybrid, half-human, half-alien babies. The idea that aliens are running a massive clandestine breeding program first gained major traction in the 1980s, and investigators such as Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs are on the front lines of this new theory. And as Jacobs regressed this episode in Barbara's life further, her account grew more detailed. They were all hooked up in some manner of machinery that monitored her vitals and growth patterns. Aliens that brought her in said, "Do you like the babies?" As if they expected some polite, admiring response, but for Barbara, that was all she could do to keep from throwing up. But in the midst of her own distaste, it struck her this hybrid baby facility must be viewed by the aliens as their crowning achievement. Because, contrary to their usual icy demeanor, she could detect a definite amount of pride when it comes to the production of these infants. It seemed they wanted to go out of their way to demonstrate their enthusiasm to her. Another instance, she was presented with one of these odd children fresh out of the nursery as if it was her own. Even though she was frightened by the strange, fragile baby, she claimed she was coerced into holding it by the attending ETs. Oddly enough, as she held the child, she said she did in fact feel compelled to bond with it, just as the ETs had requested. Suddenly, that odd infant didn't seem so odd anymore. It looked more like a fragile person who needed her protection. And as strange as the infant looked, she felt an instant connection. And that's when she realized that the infant was indeed hers, created when the aliens implanted it inside her during one of their previous encounters years before. She was then instructed to breastfeed the hybrid infant, and incredibly, despite her previous distaste, she complied and tried to get the baby to nurse from her own breast. After this odd but touching moment, she claims the baby was taken right out of her hands by one of the ETs, and she was told it was time to go. Well, her unexplained sightings still remain an ongoing, mysterious saga, to which there's been no definitive solution. Well, let's talk about the Bluff Ledge camp encounter. Two employees of a campground were spending the evening together after work, sitting on the edge of a lake and trying to relax. Then a bizarre UFO came into view and interrupted this relaxation. This craft hovered over the lake and proceeded to come so close to the campground workers they could see directly inside its cockpit, and furthermore, they could see that its pilots weren't human. This was August 7th, 1968, at a summer camp situated on Lake Champlain in the state of Vermont. It involved two of the camping staff, 16-year-old Michael and 19-year-old Janet. Two were taking a brief break from their labors one evening, relaxing on a dock on the lake when Michael pointed out a particularly bright object on the horizon. In fact, it was so bright he figured it must not be a star, but some other celestial object, such as Venus. He mentioned as much to Janet, and when the object suddenly dropped from the sky, he shouted, "Whoa, Venus is falling!" The UFO then took on a cigar-type shape, shining brightly as it began to approach the dock. As the two sat transfixed by the spectacle that was emerging before them, three bright lights came out of this cigar-shaped craft. The mothership then reversed course and left the three smaller craft behind. These three remaining craft then proceeded to put on a show for Michael and Janet as they looked on in absolute amazement. They zigzagged through the air at an impossible speed and then seemed to float like leaves, falling gently from the trees. Michael said later he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He almost had to pinch himself to make sure it wasn't some sort of a dream. The objects then advanced on them, coming so much nearer to the docks, so close they could make out the actual structure of the craft. They were dome-shaped and circular. Craft were tipping back and forth in a wild oscillating movements, and then they suddenly ceased their impossible aerobatics and entered a triangle formation, hovering in midair. And suddenly the ones on the left and the right sides of the triangle departed, leaving just the one object behind. Well, that object then moved in toward Michael and Janet, and what Michael described as the sound of thousands of different tuning forks erupted from it. UFO moved to the midpoint of Lake Champlain before heading straight for Michael and Janet as it continued to make odd audio emissions. Michael says at this point his curiosity turned to fear as he began to get the distinct impression the object and its occupants were stalking him like prey as they sat on the docks. Well, as his terror grew, he turned to Janet and said, "I think we ought to go," but to his frustration and astonishment, Janet was no longer responsive. Like a zonked-out zombie, she just continued to stare up at the craft, not even able to move a muscle. She was in a complete trance-like state. Michael felt as if he was going to get her off that dock, he'd have to physically drag her because she didn't seem able to move on her own. The object stopped right in front of him, as close enough for Michael to observe the pulsating rainbow of colors that lit up the entire edge of the craft. That craft then abruptly shot up into the air before coming back down to slam into the water. And when it re-emerged, it proceeded to move in closer to the dock where Michael and Janet were seated. As it neared, Michael was able to make out figures moving around in the transparent dome of the craft. When it finally halted just 50 or 60 feet from the dock, he was able to get a good look at the occupants. They seemed small in stature and had large heads with no visible hair, with a slick kind of sheen. Complexion was strange blue-green, offset by a set of large almond-shaped eyes situated on each side of their heads. And Michael observed that the beings had just 2 small openings for nostrils and a very tiny opening for a mouth. Their heads rested in inordinately long necks that were craning and bobbing about as the beings apparently tried to get a good view of their prey. And their prey appeared to be Michael and Janet. They just seemed as curious about Michael and Janet as they were about them. And Michael described their movements to be inquisitive and frivolous and childlike as the creatures scampered about the deck of the craft to get a better look at him and Janet. Well, the description of the aliens moving in an exaggerated, almost cartoonish fashion is one that's turned up in many UFO literature stories, countless times. Many contend that these descriptions indicate creatures that are used to an environment with less gravity. And despite the aliens' apparent lack of hostility, Michael's fear of being hunted down and captured reemerged, and he screamed out loud at the craft, "What do you want? Where are you from? Are you going to hurt us?" To his astonishment, he heard a reply. An alien voice spoke directly into his mind. "We're not here to harm you." Michael's mind responded to the invasive mental voice. He said, "What is this? I've never done this before." Then the alien told him, "This is what you call telepathy." And Michael mentally asked the being addressing him, "Where are you from?" And the creature responded with an unintelligible word that Michael took to be the name of its home planet. But Michael, still sitting at the edge of the dock with his feet dangling over the water, felt overwhelmed by the incredible nature of the encounter that was unfolding. To his amazement, the creature that was communicated with him mirrored his gesture and slapped its own knee in complete imitation of Michael's shocked disposition. Shortly thereafter, the craft moved just over their heads, and Michael made the impulsive decision to jump up into the air in an effort to touch it. He missed by a few feet before falling back down on the dock. Right at this moment, a blinding spotlight was emitted from the bottom of the UFO, shining right down on him and Janet. Fearing they were under some sort of attack, Michael scooped Janet up in his arms and tried to brace for the worst, and was then began to receive the distinct impression they were about to be rounded up and captured by the occupants of the UFO. As he clutched onto Janet's paralyzed form even tighter, he screamed out to him, "No, we don't want to go." Well, there was a blinding flash of light, and Michael lost consciousness with only a vague recollection of experience on floating sensations just prior to passing out. Next thing he was constantly remembered, Janet was lying back on the dock. It was now pitch black outside, indicating several hours had passed and the UFO was gone. Scared and confused, the two went back to the campgrounds. Although Janet had no recollection of the event whatsoever, Michael could still remember seeing the craft and the occupants short before passing out. And the fact that he couldn't account for the passing time in between would haunt him for years. So much so that one day when he was perusing his older brother's Playboy magazine, came upon an article about UFOs that included the contact information for UFO investigator Jalen Hynek. He gave Hynek a call. He was directed to a fellow investigator named Walter Webb, who was immediately interested in taking up Michael's case. Webb had Michael contact Janet, and both of them sent off 2 separate professional hypnotists in an effort to retrieve their lost memories. During Michael's hypnosis session, vivid images began to emerge of him standing aboard the alien craft and looking out through a view panel at the Earth, Moon, and the stars, apparently an indication that he had been taken up into outer space. Michael recalls looking down into a lower deck where he could see Janet, completely helpless and nude, prostrate on some sort of examining table. In his hypnotic state, he went on to claim that one of the aliens was standing over Janet and intently staring directly into her eyes. In the standard alien abduction lore, this is a technique to be referred to as a mind scan. It seems ETs have some sort of ability to scan a person's consciousness and sift through their memory simply by staring directly into their retinas. Well, this ET Engaging in this sort of alien stare down, the other alien is busy scraping skin samples off of Janet's arm as well as taking blood samples. Even more disturbing, though, Michael then witnessed a triangle-shaped device quickly descend from the ceiling and begin to probe her genitals. At this point, with his rage and indignation rising up within him at the thought of his friend being subjected to such an egregiously invasive examination, Michael turned to the alien standing near him and demanded they stop what was happening. Well, the creatures were unmoved, though, and clinically informed that it was simply a necessary procedure in order to extract ova. Even under hypnosis, Michael's memory gets a little bit foggy at this point, and either through fear or alien intervention, he once again lost consciousness. Next thing he could recall is waking up on his own exam table. His personal scraping and probing had apparently been finished while he was out, and he's led out of the examination room on to another area of the ship where other aliens awaited his arrival. Michael was just placed in a chair with some sort of headgear was put on his head, and it's unclear what the purpose of this apparatus was, but the results are well received. Michael says while he wore this piece of equipment, the aliens eagerly monitored a screen of some sort. After seeing the results, they actually broke into enthusiastic applause. Well, the story then takes a strange, almost Matrix-like turn as Michael claims the whole backdrop of the ship suddenly changed into a bizarre landscape of trees and rivers under a purple sky. As if he were immersed in some sort of virtual reality machine, and maybe that was the purpose of the headgear, we don't know. He then became aware of several other human beings meandering around in a kind of sleepwalking state. That's when he noticed Janet standing among them, but unlike the other dazed humans, Janet was now conscious, and she seemed to be absolutely terrified and sobbing uncontrollably. After being subjected to this, whether it was real or virtual image, Michael recalls the ground beneath him fading away and falling toward a spinning globe that appeared to be composed of television monitors. As he neared the surface of this TV globe, he saw that each of the television monitors is a picture of him and Janet lying unconscious on the dock with a UFO hovering over their prostrate forms. Michael braced himself for what seemed to be an imminent crash through the screens, but instead, the shattering glass he envisioned went smoothly right through the surface of one of the monitors and woke up lying on the dock next to Janet with the UFO floating above him, just as the odd globe of images had depicted. Michael then got a parting message from the aliens as he heard a voice address him with "Goodbye, Michael." Meanwhile, during Janet's hypnosis session, she recalled events nearly identical to those as Michael remembered, making this case a very credible, unexplained sightings. Well, from two teenagers on a dock, let's go to two men on the Pascagoula River. It's October 11th, 1973. Two men were taken on board a UFO at the same time, and they've maintained their story to this very day. Charlie Hickson and Calvin Parker decided to fish out of the Pascagoula River in Mississippi. While they were fishing, something hovered just over their heads that was fishing for them. Hickson was focused on his fishing reel when he noticed a strange low buzz that seemed to emanate from slightly overhead and behind him. Well, they looked toward the source and found themselves confronted with a brightly illuminated UFO floating over the river immediately behind them where they were standing. And as they watched, transfixed in astonishment, they saw an opening appear in the craft, and odd little entities floated right out of it and toward them. Hickson described these creatures as having large heads with no discernible necks to hold them up, as if the heads were just sitting between the creature's shoulders. He said the aliens had big noses, similar to some of the descriptions of so-called large-nosed grays that others have claimed to have encountered since the Pascagoula incident. Entities had just small slits for mouths, and their skin was wrinkled like that of an elephant. The mere presence of these beings was too much for Parker, apparently, and he passed out as soon as he laid eyes on them. One of the entities then floated over to Parker to pick up his comatose form, where protesting Hickson was accosted by two other entities that were somehow able to render him immobile. One on each side, the creatures had manhandled him into submission. They were both escorted into the craft and on to the examination room. To his amazement, he was placed on what he described as an invisible bed he couldn't see underneath him. And according to Hickson's stories, his eyes darted around at his surroundings. A medical examination device that looked like a large mechanical eye dropped down from the ceiling. And this device, after running what seemed to be an in-depth scan over his entire form, shot back up into the structure of the craft and After these examinations, the occupants of the craft returned the witnesses to the riverbank. Despite the psychological trauma that had been inflicted on them, they were relatively physically unharmed. Once the UFO sped off, Parker became mobile again, so the two panicked men ran to Hickson's car for shelter. Then they tried to get a handle on what it was that had taken place. They knew nobody believed their story, so they weren't sure who they could turn to. They then considered some of the larger implications they encountered and began to wonder whether theirs wasn't an isolated incident, and invading aliens are wreaking havoc across the country as part of some larger plot to subjugate the planet. And this seems to be a theme quite common in some of the earlier alien encounters of the 60s and 70s. Before the public is accustomed to the concept of alien abduction, those who had alien encounters often assume their experiences are part of some larger immediate threat, possibly an opening salvo in some kind of alien war against the Earth. And back then, the very idea of alien abduction was so unheard of that those who experienced it often thought what had happened to them was part of some global event rather than an isolated incident. And this seems to have been the case with Hickson and Parker, who immediately called up Keesler Air Force Base to let them know that the Earth was under attack. The Air Force commander who picked up the phone, and I find that a little difficult to believe, knowing how the military hierarchy works, was fairly blunt in his rebuff, telling the two the Air Force is no longer involving itself with UFOs. This was years after the infamous Air Force UFO investigative arm called Project Blue Book came to a close with no immediate public conclusions about the UFO phenomena. While stoned-warned by the Air Force, Hickson and Parker then directed by the skeptical officer to contact a local law enforcement agency. Well, they followed this advice and headed over to the local police department and granted orders to Captain Glenn Ryder and the Sheriff Fred Diamond. And the police, as is typical in cases like this when it comes to aliens and UFOs, didn't believe the men's story for an instant. But they were acutely aware that some extremely distraught disposition of the men, that something had happened and they just didn't know what it was. But they considered whether perhaps something bad had happened to the men or they had caused something bad to happen, and they were using a UFO story to cover it up. And if you see how similar this is to the reaction of law enforcement's had in the Travis Walton case, it seems that whenever anybody calls the cops with a UFO story, their immediately knee-jerk reaction is to think the people involved are either crazy or attempting to hide something. In an attempt to uncover what they believed to be an elaborate deception, they placed both Parker and Hickson in a room together with hidden microphones that picked up their every word. And unbeknownst to the two men, as they waited, investigators were listening to everything they said, figuring if they had made up the encounter for some nefarious purpose, they just might say as much while they were waiting to be talked to. But the conversation when the men were in private was even more distraught than when they were initially interviewed. Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow and talk more about alien paranormal encounters. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show, saying have a truly great evening.